want to channel my inner Jen Psaki and circle back to something that you said. You mentioned ComicsGate. Now, uh, you once said that ComicsGate started when Marvel Comics opened the door to left wing activists. What is ComicsGate for those who may not know? And what was the moment when you saw the need for it?
Well, ComicsGate is a resistance. It's a group of fans, customers, and creators who have noticed the obvious at this point, not just in comics, but everywhere, in every entertainment hobby, every industry. The left has sent activists who are very carefully trained to take over and subvert the aims of whatever company, whatever hobby it is, and bend them towards social justice. And they do this as a way to control, take power, take the levers of power, and so that they can use your company, not to make money, not to create anything that anyone wants, but to create propaganda for the left. This happened in comics. I was there. I was working at DC Comics when it did happen, and I started to notice that we were super concerned all of a sudden with issues of identity, with the idea that more women should be allowed to write comics and draw comics, and that there are too many white males in the industry, and all the characters seem to be white males and white females, and there was too much heterosexuality, and there needed to be more. Started to hear the word diversity, and I started to see some very strange people show up on the scene. They were friends of some left-wing creators. There were big left-wing creators who allowed their friends in, entryism into the comic book industry, and they immediately started to make trouble. They started to say comic books are sexist, comic books are racist, comic books are homophobic, and if you hire us, we'll change all of that. And I saw it all happen. I saw it all go down. I was one of a few conservatives who were. I'm a loudmouth conservative. I don't care. I feel like I should be able to answer, the left in the comic book industry the same degree that I have to hear them. They should hear me too, and they should hear my peers. They targeted me immediately and decided that I needed to go. And from the they started to call me a Nazi. They said I was a white supremacist. They said all these things that were.
We're white supremacists too, or the black voice of white supremacy. So yeah, you're in good
They
company there.
use that because it's impossible. You go, well, what is a white supremacist? Define that for me. And they say white supremacy is on a spectrum. Okay, like it goes from all the way from like the KKK over here to just, naturally when you create a comic book character, Ethan, like he might just be white. That's white supremacy. And I'm like, I don't want to be on that side of the spectrum, but I don't even think I'm on this side of the spectrum of that. I think that's really just strange. And the word itself is so ugly and conjures up so many negative feelings. The phrase white supremacy, obviously that's going to undo my career and anyone's career who is accused of such a thing.
Well,
So
it's a cudgel that people use, I think, to control your ideas and your thoughts because nobody wants to be branded a racist. Nobody wants to be branded a white supremacist. So if I call you that, you're going to back down. And so you're going to stop saying what you've been saying.
yeah.
If you're an average person, now you and I seem to have pretty strong opinionated beliefs that,
Why do we do this? Why don't we
yeah.
back down? Why are we asking for this grief? But we are. Listen. The other reason to do it, I believe, is just to obtain power. Because I do remember my boss Dan DiDio in 2010, getting up at a convention, a big convention, WonderCon, and giving his speech about here's the future. Here are all our books that are going to be coming out from DC Comics, everybody. And these activists stood up and said, "Why aren't you hiring women?" And he's like, "We have women working here. It's like 2% women. You need to be hiring more women." And Dan was like, "Well, we hire whoever's best for the job. Whoever's best for the job are women." And the crowd, just. And Dan was basically forced to hire. Yes. Dan was basically forced to hire all of these women who were feminists, who were activists, who weren't qualified, didn't love comics, or if they did love comics, they didn't love the comics that DC Comics makes, which are superhero adventure comics, mostly masculine power fantasies, that's what sells. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to undo all of that and subvert all of that. Uh, they wanted power. They wanted to control the media within comics so that they could establish, domination. They could decide who gets promoted, who doesn't, who's a hero, who's a villain. All of this led to ComicsGate. Fans started to notice some retailers. The problem with comics in the mainstream is that the companies make them and they sell to a retailer, which is a middleman, somebody who owns a store. And then the retailer has to sell those comic books to you, the customer. So the retailer really has no power, and the customer also really doesn't have any power either. They have to get whatever this product is and put it in their stores. And so retailers did try, though. They went to a retailer summit with Marvel Comics and said, look, right now is the greatest time in comic book history at the movies. You've got the Avengers, you've got Captain America, you've got the Hulk, you've got all the Thor, you've got all these great characters. And we've got people coming in who have seen the movies, coming into our stores and saying, where can I get comic books like this? And it's like Captain America is now a Nazi. Thor
is now ever thought, right?
He always was.
Who would ever have thought?
What an ugly statement to make about Captain America. He was always a Hydra agent. What a horrible thing. Thor is a woman. The Incredible Hulk is a little Asian kid who thinks being the Hulk is awesome. Basically everything that we see on the movie screen doesn't exist in the comics right now. And we don't like it. It's got to stop. What's going on? And I swear to you, Marvel's marketing executive who was there to talk to the retailers looked at him and said, we hear you. You don't like women. Well, we do.
Wow.
And we're going to continue to make this product, and you can either like it or lump it, essentially. And that's where ComicsGate really started. We started to see more activists who were putting messages like they had Mockingbird, a Mockingbird comic. Mockingbird is a super fun female character who has bow staffs and fights and does karate and stuff like that. Some feminist took over her book and she did this cover where she's drinking a lemonade in front of the ocean and her shirt says, "Ask me about my feminist agenda." And it's just like, that's now the only thing. What else was this cover except to announce that there is a feminist agenda now on behalf of, that's being applied to Mockingbird, who's never been a feminist before, on behalf of the writer of the comic and the artist of the comic. Another Italian artist came in and drew a really sexy drawing of Spider-Woman. He was forced to retract the drawing. The cover was taken down because it was deemed to be sexualizing women, which is weird because
which is so funny.
That's what kind of comics kind of do. I mean, they're for boys, It's like women need to they need to be beautiful in the comics. And a bunch of other things like this happened. People were losing their jobs. They were losing their positions because SJWs would identify them as going against the narrative. This one guy, Frank Cho, got a job drawing Wonder Woman variant covers. And his writer said, "You're making Wonder Woman too sexy." You had to see these covers. They were not sexy. It was Wonder Woman in bullets and bracelets up like this. And her skirt was up a little bit in the back so you could see that she was wearing panties underneath her skirt. You could see a little bit of her panties from the side. Too sexy, fire this guy. And they did. They fired him from the job that he wanted. He just wanted to draw Wonder Woman, this guy. So that's ComicsGate.
Explain this to me, because here's what makes me crazy. Now, I've always kind of talked a little bit about that aspect, the way that some women are drawn, because, I love Oracle. The fact that, she's using her brain. Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, she was formerly, Batgirl and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, she's had her heyday, but the fact that she is able to do all the things that she does in a wheelchair, because, the brain is her sexy organ. But here's what's really interesting about that whole narrative that you just said is, you're sexualizing these women and you're showing too much and da-da-da-da-da. And yet what we are seeing, now you're a parent, I'm a parent, you're seeing all of this propaganda in books now, all of this obscene material that's going into our kids' books for little children. I mean, that are almost like a how-to manual, just perversion. And so why somebody would say, oh, well, that's too sexy, you can't do that. And then on the other hand, give you an illustrated how-to manual for, gay sex is just crazy to me. So, I mean, it's like both can't coexist and yet they do. And
Yeah.
that doesn't compute. I'm sorry.
Well, I remember Oracle because that was one of the first times that I heard about representation when I was working in DC. I said, "What?" So Barbara Gordon, who was Batgirl, was shot in the spine by the Joker. Okay, yes, that happened. Now she's in a wheelchair. I was like, her friends have magic powers. Like her friends could literally fix her spine. Why? Like, or we have some of the most supernaturally gifted doctors, and you know what I mean. There is literally no reason for Barbara Gordon to remain with a broken spine in a wheelchair. It just wouldn't happen in this world. Like Zatanna would say,
Yeah.
"Fix your spine backwards," and her
Yes.
spine would be instantly fixed. So why? And DC Comics said to me, an editor over there said, "Well, we have a lot of readers who are in wheelchairs, and she represents them." And I went, "Wow, that's a weird thing to." I get it, I understand that. I think, but like it doesn't make sense from a story perspective. This seems like it is something that's being done only to pander to a certain demographic of readers without it making sense story wise. And they were just like, well, again, we want them to know that we care about them, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought about it a little bit more, and I thought, if I were in a wheelchair, am I going to want to read about superheroes that are also in wheelchairs, or am I going to want to read about Spider-Man swinging around in the sky? Do I want to read about people who share my disabilities, or as somebody who is trying to escape the world into fantasy, am I going to want to read about Superman who has no disabilities and just can do whatever he wants, and I can escape and pretend that I'm Superman for a little while, or I'm Superman's friend, or any of these things? Isn't that what it's all about? And I ask questions like this, and I got reamed out by a woman who worked at DC Comics, and I said, yeah, it wasn't until a little later that I realized, I found out why that was. I didn't understand what representation was and why it was a thing, because it was so strange to my way of thinking. Now, I don't need Wolverine to be like me. I'm not going to do anything that Wolverine does. I was told to make it so that Wolverine, when I worked on X-Men, Wolverine doesn't smoke anymore, because what if the kids start smoking because they're like, I said, that's not what, Wolverine kills people with knives. Like, are you
Yeah.
worried about that? Are you, like, what?
And that's the hill you want to
It's,
die on.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like fantasy. Like,
Yeah.
let people imagine. Like, smoking is an awful thing that nobody should do. We got it, but it looks cool when certain bad guys do it. When tough guys smoke, it looks cool. So go ahead and put it in comics and movies and all these things, and just leave it alone. Let people trust that people have brains and autonomy and make choices, good choices for themselves. But what I found out with a little bit of research, stumbled across this article one time about Lego, the Lego company. Lego company was wondering why little girls were not buying their toys.
Yeah.
And they were just like, there's got to be some market research we can do into studying the way little boys and little girls play, that we can adapt Lego to be more appealing to little girls. And they spent a lot of money. They got 2,500 boys, 2,500 girls monitored by their parents, and they gave them tons of Legos to play with and observed their play and noticed some amazing things that I think kind of explain the dichotomy. No, not dichotomy, the dissonance that's happening here. And the thing about it is that when little boys play with toys, they notice this. A little boy would pick up, say, a Batman figurine in a Lego toy, and suddenly the little boy would become Batman. Like, look out, Joker, I'm Batman, blah, blah, blah. And that's the whole thing. Little boys and males are able to sort of project a character onto themselves, or escape into a character, escape into a world. Their own ego, their own presence doesn't really matter. They could be in a wheelchair. It's not that Batman needs to be in a wheelchair. They want to be Batman. Little girls, on the other hand, no matter what character they pick up, that character becomes them. They project themselves onto the character. So they got Batman, and suddenly Batman's hosting tea parties with the Joker or whatever, being sassy and saying silly little girl things, because that's the way girls play. And that's why Barbie is such a successful toy, because Barbie doesn't have a personality. Barbie isn't a character. She's a blank slate. She's a beautiful doll for a little girl to project herself onto and her own aspirations. Barbie isn't a character that everybody knows that if you're going to play with her, you've got to treat, puppet her a certain way, like He-Man is, or the Transformers. They all have distinctive personalities because they're male properties. So when you take this phenomenon, and I don't think the way men and women play, there are certainly some exceptions. There are some girls, there are some women who are able to sort of imagine, play, create from a masculine perspective, and vice versa. Certainly in the comic book industry, a ton of super feminine guys who need to see themselves represented. They need to tell their own stories through characters like Batman and their own feelings and things. I've seen that happen. There was one guy who's like made Batman he made him kind of a simp for Catwoman. Because he wanted to express his love for his wife through these two characters. That's extremely feminine. That is, you are not Batman. Batman is not you. Anyway, once you understand that, the difference between men and women and the way they fantasize and imagine, you understand why this trouble is happening in comics. You've got women coming over and saying, none of these characters look like me. I do not relate to any of these characters, and therefore everything needs to change. They don't represent my views, my values. They don't look like me. And in fact, I'm threatened by the fact that they don't do any of those things. And meanwhile, men are just like, I'm sorry, they needed to do that. There needed to be representation. Barbara Gordon needs to be in a wheelchair because you're in a wheelchair, and she needs to be like you in order for you to relate to her in some way. That's interesting. So a lot of men just sort of made way for these feminine ideas and just said, we didn't know we were doing anything wrong, ladies. Come on in here. Now, the problem is, now that you've got women writing themselves into these, which is what happens, writing themselves into these masculine archetypes, you're now feeding that to little boys and men who are trying to read these comics, and suddenly it's garbage, because it's like, wait a second, why is Thor acting like a sassy woman? Why is, this doesn't, this, I don't want this. I don't want to pretend to be this. I don't like this fantasy. This doesn't feel right to me. And that's at the heart of why comics are having a problem right now. And I think it's happening all over the place. I think it's happening in Hollywood and all kinds of storytelling. And you can see, first of all, women are certainly allowed to read comics. We want them to read comics if that's what they want to do. But we already know the kind of storytelling that women prefer. And I'm speaking broadly, no pun intended. I'm speaking just sort of, not everybody, but from a very biological sense. What has been very successful? What are some of the properties that have been very successful with women? Twilight, 50 Shades of Grey, among them. And what do these have in common? Harry Potter. What do these characters have in common? The lead character is largely a cipher, a blank slate, somebody who doesn't have overt, you can't really describe any. Rey from Star Wars, the new Star Wars, just a person for you to project yourself onto. Who is Harry Potter? I don't know, but he's the most special guy in the world. He's amazing. He's just awesome, and everything is about him all the time, and his destiny is the future. Who is the woman, 50 Shades of Grey? I don't know. I know who the guy is. The guy has a very, because he's the fantasy object. The woman, it's from her perspective, that's supposed to be you. You're supposed to read yourself into that. Twilight, Bella. Who is Bella? Nobody, but everyone loves her. Everyone thinks she's great. Everyone's obsessed with her. She doesn't have much of a personality. You watch these Hallmark movies that are aimed at women, you'll notice that the men they have distinctive personalities, but the women who you're supposed to represent are very rarely more pretty than you. They're not going to threaten you. They're just goofy, kind of funny, whoops, a little clumsy. They're for you to project yourself onto as a woman, so that you can enjoy the fantasy. Romance novels all the same way. You know, there's no version of Han Solo as a woman. You know what I mean? Like a profoundly
Yeah.
flawed, cynical, person as a leading character in any of these properties that are aimed at women. So there
See,
are biological differences.
that's so funny because I've never watched Twilight. I've never watched any of the Harry Potter stuff. I've never watched any of those things. And I told you that, we're fanboys and fangirls. We actually had that discussion about Barbara Gordon. Like, why didn't they fix her? And we have like a chat thread where we talk about that stuff. And we had that conversation. So I'll have to go back and revisit why. I think I can't remember what we said because it's a while back. But